Itt a cselekvés ideje. Panelbeszélgetés a BCSDH szervezésében. Résztvevők: Károlyi László, Legrand ZRT vezérigazgató, magyar-francia kereskedelmi és ipar.
It's time to act. Panel discussion organized by BCSDH. Panelist László, Károlyi, Legrand Limited Chief Executive Officer, Gréta, Nagy, Dandelion Group Managing Director, Tímea, Pesti, LeasePlan, Hungária Limited. Moderator Frigyes Endersz from E.ON Hungária Limited, Director of Strategy and Sustainability.
Nagyon sok szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit, a résztvevők és a panelbeszélgetés.
So a warm welcome to all of you, panelists and audience. I think we have a very interesting topic, sustainability. The topic of our conference is focused on the future, but our panel really focuses on the present. And the title is "It's Time to Act." So it is time to find the solutions that ensure a sustainable future. And let me bring in a personal thought here. So I'm a father to 2 children. I have a 14 and a 12-year-old. And when we talk about this topic, when I close my eyes, I don't really see tons of CO2, nor technology, nor cars. I actually see my children and I think about what I can do, what can the company I work for do, what can this event do to make sure that my children can really grow up in a world that we envisage for them. And I think this is a great opportunity, but also a great responsibility to deal with this topic. So my first question to you is, obviously this is a mega trend. Sustainability, or thinking about sustainability, has started a long time ago, and there's always a turning point in these trends where the pace of the trend changes. And sometimes it's easier to recognize these trends and these turning points retrospectively. So my question to you is, do you think we have passed the turning point? Are we in the turning point? Is it yet to come? What is your take? What is your company's take? Thank you. I'm not sure what we have already passed. I don't want to go back a long time. I just would like to go back a few years. Maybe the era of the pandemic. I think the pandemic had a good impact on sustainability. It really highlighted the fact that we need to do something. But as we touched upon in the morning panel, is that now we are so busy with all the other problems, all the other challenges. So 2 years ago, our greatest headache was the pandemic. Now we have 10 times as many problems as companies, as executives, as leaders that we have to solve in order to ensure our survival. So my great fear is where this trend is going to end up, whether it's just going to be put in a drawer or not. It has become a favorite sentence of mine that there is a climate emergency, and as per definition, this means that we need to act, and we need to act now. So I heard at a BCSDH conference from a professor, he said that there are 8 billion people in the world, and if we continue doing what we have done so far, if we don't change our lifestyles, we would need 3 planets in a relatively short time. But I think we are all aware of the fact that we only have one. So the question is, what do we do with this one planet? How do we shape our strategies, our goals, our activities, so as to ensure that this planet can support the future of our children and of our grandchildren? This is a great question. And the other thing that I often think about is, obviously all of us sitting here tries to do something, and my concern is, to what extent is this sufficient? Obviously, I do try to do things, but I have increasingly the sensation that it's very little in comparison to what is needed. So I'll pass on the floor. So how do you see the issue of the turning point at your company, at your clients? Well, joining in on what Tímea has said, there's an organization that calculates the virtual milestone, so the day when we run out of the resources that was meant for the given year. And interestingly, in 2008, we saw a drop back, which resulted in an economic drawback as well. And throughout the COVID, we had the same experience. So this virtual milestone was pushed further back. At the same time, however, while GDP and profitability are the figures that define the success of a company, sustainability becomes a marginal issue. So actually, I think it would be useful to bring in new aspects. For example, social responsibility, sustainability could be new aspects that are brought in. And obviously the pandemic could also be brought in, because all these could sort of cut the risks. And in November we talked with colleagues, energy experts, and we talked about alternative heating and cooling systems and the return time that it takes. It would have taken 10 to 12 years for the investment to be returned. And now we see that they've calculated with the prices from last summer, and now we see a huge increase in the prices, so this return would have come much faster. Then the other issue is the shortened supply chains, or I think it is time to deal with social capital as well, because environmental protection will become irrelevant for those social layers who are not thinking about using renewables for heating or using natural gas for heating, but them thinking about where to collect the logs with which they will heat their homes. I think we can only talk about environmental protection if there is social justice that goes hand in hand with that. I'm not sure whether we are before or after the turning point, but earlier on we talked a lot more about sustainability, and I think we now do more. We just talked about transportation, so that there are alternatives, even if they are twice as expensive as the current solution. So we're better off than 10 to 15 years ago when we had no alternatives. I think the question is what people do as individuals, as families, as companies. Obviously the world will not change overnight, and we will not start paying twice the price for things and services. And then once we've consciously accepted the fact that such solutions require more funds, then we'll be better off. For now, the question is not whether it's expensive or cheap, but whether this is going to remain a livable planet for our children and grandchildren. Our company has set the 5th CSR goals, which are always formulated for 3 years, and this is the first time when we have a CSR goal, which I'm not sure how we will meet, and where we are no longer only focused on our own activities in terms of energy efficiency, but where we also try to influence, for example, our suppliers and freight companies, so as to ensure that they reduce their CO2 emissions independent of the volume. This is an interesting challenge, But what we are talking about is that obviously these things cost more, but to make sure that we have a future, we have to pay for these things. Obviously, you've touched upon the pandemic, and in this regard, I'd like to say that I had two important lessons that we've learned. So first of all, we solved everything of which we thought that it's impossible to do in terms of legislation, education, etc. And then we had 2 weeks to do the transition. And obviously there were problems, but we were able to solve them. And what we see is that if there's a necessity, there's a solution as well. And the other thing that you also refer to is that I had a feeling that around the 24th February, the pandemic has come to an end, simply because of the reason that there is another threat that is closer to us. And that's not good, because we should be looking forward 30 years ahead of us, but we are more prone to the dangers that are close to us. To what extent do you feel that there is an urgent necessity? Is this a possibility to companies? Is this a combination of a threat and an opportunity? It seems that we do need this force, this pressure. So where can this pressure come from? Because of the pandemic, because of the war, and in this case, obviously, it is slower. If you go out and you observe nature, you will see the signs, but you still don't feel it on your everyday lives. You can still go to work as normal, you can have breakfast, you go to work, you watch TV, and if you don't want to, you don't really feel the impact of environmental deterioration. And I think there is a great need for state level, government level, regulatory level intervention, because otherwise we won't be able to make progress. I work for a Dutch company. I will give you a Dutch example. Obviously, we've often mentioned Norway, but why is electromobility is further ahead in the Netherlands? So, for example, in Amsterdam, you can't use a car because it's being punished by the tax system. So you are basically forced to adapt. While you go to Spar, for example, and you have heaps and heaps of single-use plastic bags, you will use them. Even if I have my reusable bag in the car, I will not go out and fetch it. But once the plastic bags are out of the shops, I will go out and fetch my reusable ones. And the previous panel, I was happy to talk about the fact that sustainability is not something that is just pink and beautiful. It has a price which we have to pay. To what extent do customers pay for it? Could there be a technology with which this price could be reduced? Obviously, investors seem to be cautious. Customers seem to be cautious when discussing the issue of who is going to pay the price. Obviously, on a customer side, it's difficult. Obviously, in the field of transport, it's also a hard competition. There are obviously smart home solutions that cut energy consumption, but the primary issue when we talk about these solutions is always how much more will I have to pay for it. The question is not how much energy will I save, or to what extent will I contribute to saving the planet. The first question is always how much is it going to cost. So this is a process, and I think for this we need examples that we can follow or regulations. On a company or corporate level, the pressure comes from the fact that some people do believe that in 30 years' time there will be a problem, and then some only believe when there's immediate danger. We're not the same, but the legal regulation is also pushing us towards this direction, which will create opportunities. So Legrand, for example, is active in the field of electric infrastructure related to buildings, but we're also active in the field of electromobility. We already have a charging solution, for example. If we compare Netherlands to Hungary, you can find like 27 cars, electric cars out of 100, and in Hungary only 1 out of 100. And obviously the Netherlands is half as big as Hungary. And if we want to catch up with them, we have to have the necessary background, we have to have the willingness. But as long as environmental friendly freight transport is going to cost twice as much as currently, it's going to be very difficult to introduce these changes. If I add the regulatory challenges, obviously this has to be on a higher level than on a national level. We need a European legislation. So together things will change, because unless things go hand in hand, we will not achieve the transformation that we long for. I'd like to be a little provocative. Do you think, is it the task of companies to take the first steps? I have seen that you do a lot in this respect. You hand out awards, etc. So are you the ones to educate your customers, or are the customers the ones who demand this from you? Who has to take the first step? The ideal thing would be if it came from the customers. So we live in on this planet, in this environment. I run a lot and jog a lot. And I like running in nature, in forests, mountains. And 15 years ago, I didn't really see trash when running around. And now I can't run without running into piles of trash here and there. So that's sad, in brackets. I think the company can show a good example, but the people, it also has to come from the people. I don't think we can be successful separately. Rita, you work as consultant at a lot of companies. And there's a very ugly term called greenwashing. So companies look around and they see this is what we have to do, become green, otherwise we will be frowned upon. So they come up with good things and they communicate these good things. So what is your take? Do you think companies sort of just tag along because it's mandatory, sort of? Or is there a real willingness to change things? Is there a real drive for action? Well, there's definitely an evolution to it. So while 20 years ago, most companies just wanted to meet the regulations, and then certain systems came into existence that looked at such aspects, for example, environmental control systems, etc. There are very bad examples, and there are very funny examples of greenwashing as well. Are you willing to share any of these? Of course, without names. So my favorites are vegan tags. So, for example, products that would never have had, animal products in them, and yet they still write it's vegan. So, and this is the same with greenwashing. Actually, I don't have such a pessimistic view on the future. I think most companies have a certain elbow room to prioritize environmental protection. At the same time, however, I don't really believe that a responsible company by itself or a company leader can really represent a critical mass that will bring about a breakthrough. And I also like to refer to László. I think this won't work without normative regulations. Also, in personal development, it's usually a crisis that results in personal growth. So whether it's kindergarten age or puberty, etc. So I think a transition towards a more environmentally conscious attitude can be very peaceful. We're very used to externalities not being prized. So, for example, in Hungary, for us, it's very trivial to have water, to have drinkable, potable drinking water, tap water, that we can use it to for example, take care of our gardens. And it should not be trivial. There's no positive motivation either in the current regulations. So if I might formulate a critique, I think we would need more a braver regulation, because there is more elbow room, for example, in terms of waste. And I think there is a critical point where it pays off better. It better pays off to select your trash than to just dispose of them. And obviously, as companies, we can also say no to certain amounts of profit to make sure that we invest into less environmentally harmful technologies. And I think this should be praised on a regulatory level as well. And obviously, this cannot be achieved within 4 years. This would take effort from all the sides, but I hope I'm not very pessimistic in this regard. Yes, I started saying I'm not as pessimistic as the others, but apparently I am after all. Well, yes, I was reminded of an example. You ask whether it's personal or it's corporate. So just one example from my own life. Sometimes we have the heritage in our bags. So Legrand is using certain technologies in Hungary. This is a company that Legrand has bought, a company of over 100 years of existence, and this company used to work with a technology which was created 40 to 50 years ago. So it met the regulations of that time. The technology was phased out, coating technology was phased out in the 90s, and it turned out that it turned out that they actually did not respect all the regulations, so which actually resulted in very harmful environmental impact in the soil and in the groundwater. And I'm actually very, very proud of the fact that the company, Legrand, who's the successor company, assumed this task and undertook the task of cleaning the groundwater and the soil. Actually, there was no solution, existing solution to solve this issue. We needed a very complex method using water pumps. And I think this process started in 2002, and if I'm not mistaken, for 1 year now, these toxin levels were decreased to below the regulatory acceptable level. And we're talking about expenses amounting to 350 to 400 million euros, which is quite a lot. You mentioned the various steps of personal development or individual development. I think we're all people who are afraid of changes. Otherwise we would not be here. Obviously, you mentioned the example of the supermarket having single-use plastic bags at disposal. So what can you do personally to make sure that sustainability becomes a routine in your companies? Obviously, introducing technologies is also difficult, but changing people's behaviors, changing processes is even more difficult. And I'm asking specifically about your companies, so that we don't just talk in general terms. So what can you do? I think you have to start with yourself. While I was listening to László, I was thinking, yeah, we have 800 SaaS suppliers. And so if I were to say that I will be stricter towards our suppliers and towards our company, I think I would lose a lot of partners. Returning to myself, I think 5 years ago I started being very committed to e-mobility and to being very committed to this issue, starting with small things, for example, chucking paper towels. Colleagues were not very happy about that, obviously. Then we chucked PET bottles. So these are very small steps, but these are shifts in mindsets. So it's not only e-mobility that we can talk about, but you mentioned water, Gréta. And so, for example, we have a lot of quotes on water efficiency, on the importance of water. We have to talk about these issues. We started organizing our events carbon neutrally. Now our colleagues already know what this means. So I only sign green license plate cars for 5 years now. Obviously, there has to be an example shown by management, by leadership, and it has to be visible that this is something that we have to do and act for every single day. And this is a very important change management. Obviously, you have to think very differently if you drive a green car or an electric car, and then if you drive a 3,000 cubic meter diesel, cubic centimeter diesel car. So change management, consistency, and dedication. What are your experiences? I don't want to repeat Tímea. I think there are a lot of similarities. But what I'd like to highlight is that we try to orient our colleagues by showing an example, and we try to show them that change is part of our lives. We shouldn't be afraid of change. We should use it as opportunities. And this has become a routine. It has become routine in the past 10 years. So every year we organize team building events where together with the colleagues we look at certain new solutions, sometimes within our own fields, sometimes outside of it, and obviously sustainability is always a part of it. But the main message is that that change is a part of our lives. Obviously, for example, if I take the example of rain falling, I cannot do anything to change the rain, but I can either not go out or bring an umbrella. Thank you. If you were to write a bottle, a message, and put it in a bottle, what would you write on your piece of paper? What I've done in 2020, starting the sentence saying what I've done in 2022. So first of all, I'd say I thought about things and I was willing to give up things and give up things that are not necessary. So what I can say, or what I could say, is that the previous panel was moderated by my partner. If I were to ask him 5 years ago, he would not have been willing to do that. And I think now him using Green Deal, the words Green Deals, etc., or being the head of the Race to Zero working group at BCSDH is also a great thing. Thank you. And my effort is to convince everybody that we do all this for our grandchildren. Thank you very much to all of you for the discussion. A couple of words that I'd like to highlight. Force, external force, cooperation between customers, corporate and then standing up for things. These are the three terms that stuck with me. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a pleasant conference for the remainder of the day.